Shadows of the Night. English summary story. One Saturday morning, a young upset lady with a strong accent called the police. She said someone was dead, covered in blood, and cold on the floor. Detective Inspector Evans heard the call at the office. There was usually a lot of crime in London on Fridays, but this news surprised him. The operator asked for the lady's name and where she was calling from, a nightclub called Lust in Charing Cross. The lady, Helena Kowalska, apologized for her English. She asked when help would come. The operator got more details and asked if she knew the dead person. Helena said it was the big boss who shot himself. Inspector Evans couldn't believe it. Stanley Cooper, the owner of Lust and a big shot in the city's nightlife, was dead. He was known for running bars, clubs, and even a dog track. The police thought he was a big criminal, but they had no proof. The forensics team was on the way to check the crime scene. Superintendent Fisher, a powerful officer, told Evans to take Sandra, another detective, to join the investigation. Fisher wanted them to dig deep and consider the death suspicious. Before leaving, Evans found Sandra in the staff kitchen, and they rushed to see what happened to Stanley Cooper. Sandra was surprised by the news. She joked about her looks and wondered what trouble Cooper had caused this time. Evans hinted that Cooper wouldn't be talking anymore. He was found dead in his office, probably by suicide. Sandra, wide-eyed, exclaimed in a playful Italian manner. They both hurried out to investigate Cooper's death at Lust. The nightclub looked small outside, squeezed between two bars on a narrow street. Colorful posters on the door showed which DJs played there. Red lights spelled out, Lust, above the entrance. Inspector Evans joked it could be a nice spot for a first date. Inspector Cecchino wasn't into the humor, thinking they were too old for such places. Evans teased Cecchino about being young and single, saying she'd easily find a date there. But Cecchino, turning 35 soon, disagreed. They discussed the club's exclusivity compared to others owned by Cooper. The guard let them in, and they saw the messy bar area with alcohol smell, littered with bottles and cigarette butts. They spotted a woman on the phone, probably the cleaner. Evans, knowing a bit of Polish, suggested talking to her later. They moved on to Cooper's office. Cecchino felt uneasy about seeing a dead body, while Evans seemed oddly pleased about Cooper's death. Inside, the forensic team was busy taking pictures. Evans asked if it was true that the king was dead. In the office, the forensics expert Vash Singh discussed the scene, mentioning a lack of struggle and the room's tidy appearance, except for something odd behind the desk. Inspector Evans examined the body of Stanley Cooper, lying on the floor with a noticeable item in his hand. Evans asked Vash for thoughts on what might have happened. Vash suggested it appeared like a self-inflicted incident but advised against ruling out other possibilities until further investigation. They confirmed no signs of body movement. Inspector Cecchino joined, observing Cooper's appearance and asking about the time frame. They estimated when it might have occurred. Cecchino wondered if there could be other factors involved, noting a detail on Cooper's attire. Another expert mentioned finding something intriguing during photo examination. Cecchino reviewed images on the computer, displaying various rooms in the nightclub, including the office. Inspector Evans and his team examined security camera footage but found it had been turned off. Moving on, they interviewed Mrs. Kowalska, asking about the nightclub when she arrived for work. She mentioned things seemed normal, doors locked, lights off, and the sign on, which was common. They inquired about the alarm system, but there seemed to be a language barrier. Mrs. Kowalska mentioned the alarm was off upon her arrival, assuming the manager or someone else was there, as they sometimes played poker late. They asked about the manager, Omar Omari, and the number of people working at the club. She offered a list of names and numbers. Expressing the need for brevity due to her work schedule, Mrs. Kowalska denied knowing about any recent arguments involving Stanley Cooper. She suggested talking to Omar, hinting he might know more. Evans clarified, asking about business dealings or rumors involving other groups, but she denied any involvement, claiming to be just the cleaner. After 5 minutes of knocking, Omar Omari finally opened his apartment door in North London. He seemed casual about his boss's death, making a disrespectful remark. Inspector Cecchino urged him to take things seriously. Omar invited them in, acting overly polite. They sat on a stained futon as Omar returned, putting on a t-shirt and rolling up socks during the interview. Omar mentioned working late till around 4:30 a.m., emphasizing the event with good DJs. He left alone and took the night bus home. Cecchino inquired about anyone seeing him leave, but Omar said no one he knew saw him. He mentioned Bruno Tartufo, Cooper's right-hand man, being in the office. When asked about access to Cooper's office, Omar hinted at some who had access without invitation, mentioning a woman named Kim Watt, who managed Cooper's dog track but frequented the club too. Omar hadn't seen Kim Watt at the club that night. The inspector asked who else might have access to Cooper's office, but Omar diverted to talk about Kim, implying a special relationship with Cooper. Inspector Evans found the club manager strangely appealing, contrasting him with a loyal but unintelligent henchman who held keys to all of Cooper's places. Evans noted down their names. He asked Omar about recent events that might have made Cooper enemies, and Omar mentioned his refusal to be involved in Cooper's outside business. Inspector Cecchino recalled Helena mentioning Omar's knowledge of Cooper's private life. Omar admitted to telling Helena some things in private. Cooper wanted Omar to deliver a message to someone in Walthamstow, but Omar declined, claiming it was too risky. Evans then asked about the security cameras at the club. Omar, the manager, explained the system, mentioning it automatically records and deletes videos after a month. Evans pointed out someone stopped the recording that night. Omar dryly noted it was a wise move if planning a crime. Evans inquired about any other copies of the footage, but Omar assured him Cooper's home was secure. They discussed Bruno Tartufo, a name previously connected to drug dealings in the West End. Leaving Omar's place, Evans showed a serious interest in finding Tartufo and Kim Watt, requesting their addresses. He also instructed the family liaison officer to contact Stanley Cooper's daughter before rumors spread. Later that day, they headed to an elegant townhouse in Chelsea, following up on an address. Inspector Evans and Inspector Cecchino went to the addresses of 3 Kim Watts and encountered Bruno Tartufo. At the third address, Kim Watts and Bruno Tartufo were surprised by the police at the door. Kim seemed surprised, while Bruno, a short man with a thin mustache, made a sly comment. Evans introduced themselves and mentioned discussing Stanley Cooper. Kim seemed sarcastic, while Bruno interrupted, indicating recognition. Evans smiled, acknowledging they had a lot to discuss. After an hour of interviews, they left Kim's house and headed back to the station. Reflecting on the encounters, Cecchino found Bruno surprisingly short, noting his intimidating behavior towards Kim. They discussed Kim's reactions, noting her emotional fluctuation and lack of a solid alibi during the incident, emphasizing how hard it was to prove one's whereabouts at that early hour. Evans joked about the challenge of proving they were asleep like most people in London at that time. Inspector Evans teased Inspector Cecchino about turning him down for a Friday night out, and they laughed about their friendship. Evans then asked about Bruno, noting his behavior didn't seem surprised by the news. Cecchino found it suspicious that Bruno left the club at 5 a.m., just before the incident. Discussing further, Cecchino expressed doubts about Bruno's claim of leaving the club due to Cooper expecting a visitor. Evans agreed it seemed too convenient. However, they noted the potential advantage of finding Bruno at Kim Watt's house, considering her connection to Cooper. At the station, they briefed Superintendent Fisher, who, focused on a football match, admitted the lack of solid proof against Cooper's suicide. Despite many having reasons to dislike Cooper, they acknowledged the difficulty in gathering conclusive evidence. Deciding to end the day and enjoy the weekend, they left the office. On Monday, Cecchino arrived early, anxious about developments. She found an incident room at the station, organizing details related to Stanley Cooper's death. When Evans arrived, Cecchino, visibly upset, inquired if he had heard anything new. Someone had broken a window and set fire to the place, destroying everything. Evans questioned the lack of security. Cecchino revealed that an officer was stationed until Saturday evening when the club manager locked up. Evans asked about possible motives, suspecting Omar Omari initially, but Cecchino presented reports of stolen greyhounds. 6 expensive racing dogs were missing, with connections to Cooper's dog track managed by Kim Watt. Evans inquired about the dogs linked to the club fire. Cecchino explained it might be a symbolic act of destroying Cooper's empire, as Lust was his prestigious club. Kidnapping the dogs aimed to harm Cooper's gang further. Cecchino suggested finding the dogs could lead to the killer. Evans agreed but opted for coffee before diving into the details. The conversation then shifted to the extensive CCTV network, present on roads, public transport, and stations. Reviewing footage from the night buses between Trafalgar Square and Finchley in North London proved a laborious task, aiming to confirm Omar Omari's statements about his bus routes. He usually favored the 134 or the N13 but couldn't specify his exact ride. Meanwhile, Inspectors Evans and Cecchino meticulously combed through the extensive recordings from Lust nightclub's Friday night, eventually spotting Bruno Tartufo exiting shortly before 5 a.m., concluding 5 minutes later. Their astonishment was palpable as they realized Tartufo had left before the fatal incident involving Cooper. However, their focus shifted to whether he returned. The footage in Cooper's office seemed surreal, almost like witnessing the deceased come back to life. Cooper gestured, Tartufo left. Cooper made a swift call, manipulated the recording himself, leaving the detectives bewildered. Amidst the scrutiny, news arrived about Omar Omari's bus, an accurate route but departing an hour later than claimed, leaving the inspectors contemplating the significance of the time gap. The detectives dedicated most of Monday to interviewing Lust's staff and employees from Cooper's other venues, yet their efforts proved unproductive. Most had departed before the manager, unable to recall any unusual events. A significant detail emerged from a worker at the Walthamstow dog track, mentioning seeing Kim Watt, the boss, smoking outside a Soho bar around 3:30 a.m., an omission from her earlier statement. This contradicted her claim of leaving work shortly after 1 a.m. Inspector Evans suggested a prompt revisit, echoing a previous intention to do the same with Omar Omari. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Vash Singh, forensics, who had significant news. In Vash's office, he presented evidence. The angle of the wound on Cooper's skull ruled out self-infliction, indicating a potential foul play. The marks on his skull indicated he was lying down, about 2 feet above the ground. Vash's analysis eliminated the possibility of Cooper kneeling or standing. The absence of marks at head height in the room led to speculation that the perpetrator neither stood nor knelt. Vash also mentioned the perpetrator's attempt to stage the scene by leaving behind certain objects. The ammunition used was rare, found in fewer than 5% of revolvers, more commonly seen in Eastern Europe. Inspector Cecchino contemplated the involvement of the Polish cleaner, connecting her potential associations within Cooper's circle, given the curious circumstances surrounding the incident. Inspector Giochino, with a smile at Bash, turned to her colleague with a hint of frustration. "Will you cease accusing everyone, Gary?" she complained. "First Bruno, then Omar, Kim, and now you're suspecting Helena Kowalska." He remained resolute. "I want to talk to them all again," he replied firmly, proposing to start with the women, considering the lipstick on Cooper's collar. When they revisited Kim Watt's home, she greeted them with the same surprise as before. They settled in the kitchen, and she offered them tea. As Inspector Cecchino observed the woman's efforts at hospitality, she subtly nudged her colleague. When questioned about her presence in central London after 3 a.m. on the night of the incident, Kim hesitated, nervously biting her lip. "I've nothing to hide," she eventually said, taking a cigarette from the nearby box. She admitted to being in town after work but paused, seemingly hesitant to elaborate further. On the night of the incident, Kim Watt explained she avoided Lust due to Bruno's presence, opting for a nearby salsa bar until Omar finished work around 4 a.m. However, when questioned about their whereabouts before Omar's departure at 5:30 a.m., she became visibly uncomfortable, admitting they visited a hotel where Omar's friend works as a night manager, occasionally using an empty room for their amusement. Superintendent Fisher entered the incident room, finding the detectives engrossed in laughter. Unamused, she urged them to resolve the case promptly, given escalating gang violence. Despite the investigators' progress eliminating suspects, Cooper's girlfriend and the bar manager were corroborated by a hotel recording, clearing their involvement. The cleaner, initially suspected due to her nationality aligning with the rare bullets found, revealed no ties to any criminal activity upon investigation. However, Bruno Tartufo, the last known presence at the scene with an unconfirmed alibi, remained under close surveillance. Despite their ongoing efforts, Fisher emphasized the urgency to solve the case before the situation escalated further. She acknowledged their watchfulness over Bruno, especially given his attendance at Cooper's funeral scheduled for later that day. Inspector Giochino and Evans were waiting in an unmarked car outside the crematorium, watching the crowd gather for Stanley Cooper's funeral. Giochino expressed her discomfort about the place, remarking on Cooper's violent history. Suddenly feeling ill, she stepped out for fresh air. Evans noticed 2 men in the crowd paying undue attention to her. The radio buzzed with news of an arrest related to the arson at Lust. Bruno's younger brother, Alessio, was caught. Alessio revealed a split in Cooper's gang, led by Bruno and another figure in Walthamstow. They decided to investigate Bruno's house before he returned from the funeral. Evans and Giochino entered Bruno's residence, suspecting criminal activity in the cellar despite lacking a search warrant. Dogs greeted Evans enthusiastically, distracting him while Jokino ventured downstairs. She placed a box of bullets she'd purchased undercover on a table. As she attempted to leave, Evans caught her. Jokino confessed to planting the bullets, driven by a desire for justice against Cooper's gang, likening Cooper and Bruno's criminality. Evans was shocked to learn of her nephew's death due to involvement with drug dealers tied to Cooper's club, ultimately realizing Jokino's involvement in framing Bruno. Evans left Jokino alone, grappling with the consequences of her actions, while he dealt with the revelation of her involvement in the setup. The case took a dramatic turn, leaving both detectives to grapple with their moral compasses.